Hello and welcome to our webinar, Data Privacy and Your Business. This is presented by the Vermont Law School and the Vermont Small Business Development Center through a partnership that is a program called Community Navigator Pilot Program. This is a statewide initiative with 9 organizations that are coming together to help business owners get the tools and resources that they need to start and grow. This program is funded in part through a grant through the U.S. Small Business Administration. Before we get started, my name is Sarah Monroe. I'm the program coordinator of the Community Navigator program at Vermont Small Business Development Center. I just want to walk through a few technical logistics with you. We are activating live captioning today so that you can turn that on. Please know that this is run by machine learning, so there may be some typos here and there, especially when we're talking about some legal aspects. We are recording this session and we will email those links to you tomorrow. We'll also post this on our website for future playback, and we want to say hello and welcome to those who are watching video on demand. Please use the Q&A to ask questions. We have some folks working in the background who are going to help us manage the questions. We'll interrupt the speakers as needed. There may be some meatier questions that we will hold for the end, so please be patient with that. And with all of that, I will hand it off to our speakers today, Jeannette Eicks, who's a professor at Vermont Law School, and Vermont Small Business Development Center advisor, Sergio Alvares. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. And well, to start, I think we can look at a very important question. Why is data privacy and data protection an important subject? Why does that matter? Well, I brought here a few facts and figures just to give you an idea of how important that is. Last year, 2021, there were 148 million data breaches worldwide. That is a huge number. And in the last 12 months, 63% of small businesses report experiencing a data breach, right? That is no longer the case that data breaches are just for medium and large companies. Small businesses are targeted just the same. 43% of the data breaches are aimed at small business. However, only 14% of these businesses are prepared to weather such an event, right? And well, it boils down to the liability cost of having a data breach, right? The average cost of a data breach for a small business can range anywhere from 120,000 to 1.24 million. And if a business is not prepared for such a liability, well, that is a big problem. And yeah, as I said, it's not anymore just the problem of larger businesses. Companies with revenue between 100,000 and 500,000, they can expect as many data breaches as those earning between 1 and 9 million, right? So, and you might ask yourself, wow, 148 million data breaches in 1 year. Why so many, right? Can we go to the next slide? So yes, why so many? Well, the simple answer is it is profitable. And worse, we make it profitable, right? We leave the door open for these kinds of data breaches to happen. Human error and the lack of appropriate precautions are really the main cause, 95% of the data breaches, right? So it's really either businesses do not know how to protect their data, or if they know how to protect their data, they don't act on that knowledge, right? They don't really take the precautionary measures to protect it. So, but then you think, okay, how is this profitable? So there's a research that comes out every year, which is a price list of stolen data that is sold in the dark web. I put the link there for the 2022 price list, just so you have an idea. Americans have the cheapest stolen full identity. And by full identity, I mean social security number, name, date of birth, all that information. And that record is sold by, on average, $8, right? So that's how much our full identity is worth in that market. Japanese and European identities are more expensive, are 25 per record. And you might think, well, that might not be too profitable. Well, they don't sell one record at a time. They sell data sets with hundreds of records. Credit card information, the same, right? Credit card number can range from 11 cents to $1,000, depending on how much credit that car holds, what kind of card it is. A PayPal account can range from $5 to a few thousand, depending also what kind of account it is, how much balance does he have. So basically all of our information is out there for sale if we don't take care of the data that we hold and we protect it. And so one important thing in the next slide is a question about, how can we approach that in a better way? So small businesses, or any business for that matter, usually think about data privacy as it's an afterthought, right? And data protection is an afterthought, which is an inadequate approach, because they go about it, let's say, I'll create a service, I'll create a product, or I'll create a business process, all of these that they use customer information. And then they think, oh, I'm using customer information. There are rules that govern the usage of this information. So let me just find out how to comply with those rules, if they ever get to that step, right? And that is the problem. Instead, data privacy and data protection should be embedded in the service design, the product design, and the process design, right? That's what we call data privacy by design and by default. Just in other words, right? The aspect of data privacy and data protection should not be just the cherry on the cake, that last element that goes on top, right? It should be a fundamental ingredient of the cake itself. It should be embedded in the design. If you're going to put together a new service that uses customer information, okay, how am I going to design this service in a way that the usage of that customer information is protected, right? And complies with the privacy rules. So, and the problem of having that approach of data privacy and data protection as an afterthought is that if it is an afterthought, most likely it will not happen. It will not be implemented. And that's when businesses take unnecessary risks, right? Because in the case of a data breach, they are taking a big risk of not having the appropriate measures in place. Okay, so you might be thinking right now, Sergio, great, I got that this is important. So what can I do? Well, in the next slide, I bring it here for you. Can we go to the next slide?
Working on it.
All right, thank you. So here are 5 key principles that it's a framework from the Federal Trade Commission, is a guide for businesses to protect personal information. And these 5 key principles, they're really the foundation, the building blocks on what to do to be in a protected place. So the first step is really to take stock and know what personal information your organization has, right? You should have an inventory of all the information that you have, personal information, client information, that are in your files, in your computers, in your devices, or even in your file cabinets, physical file cabinets that hold client information. So you should know what you have. Then second step is really, most likely you have a lot of information that you don't need. So the idea is to scale down, right? Keep only the data, only the information that you need to run your business today, right? And that data that you select and say, this is what I need, then in step 3, we're going to look into more detail later, is what you should protect. That is the information that you keep, and you should take all the measures to protect it. Then in step 4 is the data that you said, okay, this is what I don't need, right? In the scale down step. So then you should really properly dispose that so it doesn't fall in the wrong hands. And last but not least, you should have an appropriate plan to respond to data breaches. You might think, well, but I'm taking all these measures so it doesn't happen. Say, well, as the saying goes, If we are alive, we're always at risk to not being alive, right? So there is an inherited risk of holding client information. So you should have a plan. You should be prepared for worst case scenarios, right? I put the link of the resource from the Federal Trade Commission, and I'll encourage you to look at it at the full material.
I would add here for folks that are looking to create a plan, there's a great resource from the Sedona conference also, and the resources at the end of this PowerPoint presentation that gives you a template for a plan. And you can go through and sort of complete it yourself. So there's some DIY help out there as well.
Excellent. So you have already a lot of great resources. So in the next slide, we have a little bit going a little deeper in step number 3, which is really, okay, how do I protect the information that I will keep? Well, a very important thing to always remember, human error is the weakest link when it comes to data privacy and data protection. So limiting the access to this information, to this data, is crucial. So only those who need access to this data, otherwise they cannot do their job, right, without their data, only they should have access to the data. Everybody else should not, right? So that should be like a very important rule. And in case you have people that need access to that, and or various people that need access to that, something that you can do is also anonymize the personal identifiable information portion of it. Namely, if you have a client record and you want to analyze what is the purchase pattern of that client, well, instead of having the client full record with the client personal information and their purchasing data, you can turn all that personal information into a unique ID number. So you know that unique ID number, you don't know who that is. You know that that client, which is a number, you don't know their personal information, has this pattern of purchasing. So somebody that works on that area can use the data, the client record, without knowing who the client is, right? So that is a way that you don't lock the data away from people that need the data to do their work. So, and here is really, we go into one of the most important elements is really to have the appropriate security measures, right? Physical security goes without saying. Not everyone can just go and stroll into your facility and access a computer or access a file cabinet. So that is something that
I'm going to pause you here and put an exclamation point on this. For a lot of our Vermont folks, we don't think about security. Vermont is a safe place. I am sure there are folks listening to this that do not lock their doors at home and don't lock their cars and everything else. Data security requires that extra step for physical security. It takes only once, and your data is out there. So.
Exactly. Thank you, Jeannette, for pointing that out. I grew up in Brazil, so I'm completely paranoid about physical security. So that to me goes without saying. So thank you for pointing that out.
We're a little relaxed here about that.
Absolutely. No, and I realize that. I mean, I'm here in Vermont, super paranoid, no reason for it. But well, it is something to really to think about, right? Because yes, if we have to make it a little harder for bad actors to, if the doors are not wide open, they might not come in.
Don't leave the keys in the car.
Exactly.
Data-wise, folks.
Exactly. So the second point is really the electronic security. And that is a very important one because today we do everything using computers or cell phones or various devices, point of sales, all sorts of electronic systems that hold data and information, very sensitive. So having best practices there as well, having antiviruses, having multi-factor authentication, right? That text message that you receive to log into somewhere or an application that you need to, in addition to your password, to log in somewhere else, all those things should be in place, right? So that you minimize the chances of having a data breach. But it's not just about you. It's about everybody else that works with you or for you. right? And that includes employees and contractors and service providers, right? Their access to data, their usage of data, how they do the work, and all of that, and the devices they use for work. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration to have really appropriate security measures. So, and one thing that I'd like to point out here in terms of protecting information, you should, when you have agreements with third-party service providers that use customer information, you should be really curious about the contractual fine print, right? So imagine you have service provider that is, well, it's the company you use to provide clients with electronic payments, to receive electronic payments, right? And that company, you say, okay, they provide their service, they hold customer data. If anything goes wrong, they're liable because I'm outsourcing that risk to them. Well, that is not entirely true, because if your computer, if your company is the entry door of that data breach, well, then you're liable as well, right? Or maybe you're solely liable. So there is a lot that can go wrong in that partnership in terms of who is liable in case of a data breach. And you should know, right? You should really understand that liability landscape when it comes to third-party service providers, right? So this is an important thing that we seldom think about. We just think, okay, somebody else is doing that, is their problem. Not entirely.
I'd add to that quickly, Sergio, that so many times what we're doing is clicking I agree in these third-party contracts. Even that fine print you should read, because that fine print is often what lawyers refer to as a contract of adhesion, or you might hear it as a click wrap agreement. And those agreements are set up to handle everyone at the same level. That might not be the same level or the right level for your business and what you're doing. So you really need to investigate that and understand it. I know it's tempting to click I agree without reading it, but read it. It's important. Print it, share it with your insurance provider. A little trick of the trade here is that if you share these things with your insurance provider, they're vested in having you minimize your cybersecurity liability. So they're going to help you along with some of this as well. So there's some other tools you have at your disposal as a small business, instead of just going to a lawyer, which I would also recommend, but I understand and appreciate that that can be expensive.
Exactly. So, and just to wrap that part of prevention, I think it's worth just, in the next slide, it's worth just, explaining a little bit how does that happen, how a data breach happens, how actually this data get accessed. Well, first, there is something called phishing, and we're all familiar with that. If you ever got a phone call that says your car insurance is about to expire and you should call back and give all your personal information, right? So that is a type of phishing. We have voice phishing, which is this kind of message, automated message. We have text message, also trying to entice us to provide information, emails. So all this kind of fraudulent communication that has this urgency approach and pretending to be somebody or somebody legitimate to try to extract information from you, right? This is one of the most common types of fraud, to extract either passwords and credentials and information.
Often we say the elderly are particularly vulnerable to this. So, watch yourself and watch your family.
Absolutely. And this is really, you can take some simple steps to prevent that. Namely, you don't open attachments if you don't know who is sending, right? Don't click on links that you don't know what that is. A message that it doesn't sound right probably is not right, right? You can, if you got a call from somebody saying they are who they are, well, you tell that you call back, and then you call back the legitimate company or governmental body and you verify if they indeed called you. You can also check the links, right? Because sometimes a little typo, they will use a link that looks legitimate, but sometimes they will have just like a little typo that you will not notice and will end up clicking on it. So don't click. If you don't know it, don't click, don't download.
And sometimes like the shipping-amazon.com, those are tricky. They look right. And Amazon actually uses one that's not shipping dash, it's shipping.amazon.com. And so these are all tricks, and they're using our desire to trust against us. So be wary. Nothing bad is going to happen if you try to reach out to who you think the actual sender of the message is to verify. Always verify.
Absolutely. And the danger of clicking in those links or downloading these attachments is what comes in the next slide that we call a ransomware. So if you click on those links or if you download an attachment, there is a virus that will install on your computer or on your device, it can be your mobile phone. And the risk is that that virus can encrypt your files and prevent you from accessing it. Basically, it will lock yourself out of your computer. Nothing will work. You can't access anything from your computer. It will hold your device hostage. And therefore your business, if your entire business is run from a computer, right? So, and they will request a ransom. They will request a payment in order to unlock your computer, right?
And it's not just your computer, right? If you're on a network, it's everybody's computer. So most of us, even at home today, have a network of family systems that we're connected to. If you get ransomware, your kids got it, they can't turn their papers in, your husband got it, and he's frustrated with you. And all of those photos, I may have had this experience 20 years ago, all of your photos get encrypted too. So this is a big thing for you personally. And as a business, of course, if all of this is encrypted, you can't do business. It's a problem.
And if you think, okay, if I pay, I will be okay. Well, I have sad news, because very often those who pay to have the computer unlocked do not get it unlocked, right? Because these days, the technology, this kind of fraud has evolved in a way that non-technical people can use ransomware, but they don't have the technical abilities to unlock things. So it's basically they are using it as a service because they are not technical folks. So they don't have the ability to actually provide you with your data back, and that data will be lost. That computer.
There are actually services out there for criminals, so they can go sign up to be a criminal, to use ransomware to ransom your data.
And they don't know how to unlock it.
Exactly.
So it's called ransomware as a service. It's an industry almost. So beware, it's out there, it's everywhere. And there are some simple steps you can take to protect yourself. Have an antivirus software, even if you're a Mac user, right? And if you have, let's say, a built-in antivirus, like you have Windows Defender that comes with Windows, is a built-in, make sure it's on, make sure it's working, right? But having an antivirus, that is really the ground floor, the foundation prevention. And well, don't click or download suspicious files and links. Don't go to websites that are not, well, these days, some web browser will say, this website is not safe, so they won't even show you, but don't insist, don't go into this kind of websites. And if something happens,
don't click the advanced take me there anyway button, right? That's going to cause problems for you.
Exactly. And in case something happens, well, you have to really isolate the infected computer, disconnect it from the internet, disconnect it from the network, so it doesn't go to other devices, right? It's like the COVID, right? If you have a positive diagnosis where you have to quarantine, you have to isolate yourself. Well, same goes for a computer that is infected with a ransom. So last but not least, data privacy and data protection is all about preparedness, right? Acknowledging that having that customer data comes with a risk and taking appropriate precautions, right, with the seriousness that this deserves is of utmost importance. And again, knowing and not acting is just as bad as not knowing, right? That is really important. If you know that you should protect your data, well, then go and do the necessary steps. And so you simply, if I want you to leave with one message from this prevention part, is that don't be the low-hanging fruit for bad actors, right? Easy is hard and hard is easy. If you cut corners today, you may risk to be liable in the future. But if you do the hard thing today, which is to take the appropriate measures, well, the future will be much safer, right? So, and I understand this can be overwhelming, this can be confusing. And if you need help, well, you can reach out to the SBDC for advising, and we can advise you on the steps to take to get that implemented. So at the end of the presentation, you'll have all the contacts.
Thank you, Sergio. I'm going to pick up here, and as I have done, please feel free to jump in. So a couple of disclaimers as we move into this section. The law regarding data privacy and your obligations to secure customer data are evolving very rapidly. So the issues are complex, is my second disclaimer. So if you feel that you may have just jumped into the deep end, that could be because it's hard stuff and it's not easy even for lawyers and people that are well trained in this. So reach out, get help. All right. What we're going to talk about here today is some general guidance, a little bit of orientation to the law, a couple of checklists, a lot of resources that will be in links to this presentation, so you can go and explore these at your leisure. Some links to the law, because I believe in being well informed as citizens. And we're going to talk about pre and post cyber events, data management and privacy policies, and then data breach legal requirements. We've talked already a little bit about the prevention side, and we're going to talk a little bit about your obligations and then the requirements if you have a data breach and what you should do then. A little bit about personally identifiable information, or PII. What is PII, or personally identifiable information? Well, it's a small portion of the bigger amount of data you collect. You may collect how many widgets you've sold, and that's just fine. And what folks steal regarding that is between you, the criminal, and your competitor. It may hurt your business, but it is not going to get you into legal trouble if you lose how many widgets you sold last year. However, if you connect the names to those widgets and who and what their address is and what their credit card number is when they bought those widgets, then you have a problem. And that's the personally identifiable information. That's the data about who. It's the data that we as individuals can't afford to have released about us. By law in Vermont, personally identifiable information includes the following: Social Security numbers, state and federal IDs, all government IDs. If you, for some reason, have people scan a copy of their driver's license and put it in your database, or their healthcare card, or half a dozen other IDs like that, those can all end up being PII that you have to notify about if you have a breach. Financial ID, access codes, and passwords are personally identifiable information. Biometric data, genetic information, and healthcare information. The last two are sensitive in Vermont, but federally they're not, which is strange unless you are a medical or a healthcare provider. So there's conflicting rules between the state and the federal government, and there's certainly a pro-privacy take on things as far as our Attorney General is concerned in the state of Vermont. Failure to protect personally identifiable information is considered an unfair and deceptive business practice. All right, if that sounds harsh, it is. And legally, that is well protected. So you wanna tread with care. about people's personally identifiable information. PII does not include broader information about somebody's computer IP address or their habits online, etc. So if you've got a trail of cookies, that is not considered PII through the state of Vermont. PII does not include publicly available information. So if you have gone out and used a directory somewhere to put in names and addresses of people that you are going to market to through direct mail, and you lose that information, that is not PII under the state law because you gained it from a public source.
I just want to jump in, if I could, Professor Eicks, and remind everybody we are happy to answer questions, and please feel free to post them in the Q&A and we'll answer them.
All right. Businesses have legal questions around handling data. And these are questions everyone should have. If you don't have these questions, stop and reflect for a moment why you might not have these questions. Even Main Street businesses who are just selling to folks that walk in and out have personally identifiable information that they need to secure. So take a few minutes, and if these questions aren't some you've already thought of, maybe you should give them some consideration anyway. What information can I and should I keep? As Sergio talked about earlier, sort through it. Only keep what you have to keep. If you aren't keeping a lot of information, you can't lose a lot of information, right? So you're only liable for what you have. So get rid of as much extra as you can. Clean it out. Get rid of it. Who should have access to my data? Only the people who are using it for a business purpose, right? And Sergio talked about this. This is about access control. The law takes access control seriously. If you have an employee who is accessing something that they shouldn't access, technically that's a data breach. And that's an interesting thing to think about as well. Do I have to treat the data of residents of different places differently? Yes. So if you have a European Union citizen that comes and does business with you, you have to treat them as they should be treated under the GDPR, which is the data privacy law that protects European Union citizens. In California, if you have a California citizen, you have to treat them in accordance with the CCPA, which is their Data Privacy and Consumer Privacy Act. Those laws are radically different than the Vermont laws. It's complicated. If you feel like, whoa, you just said basically, I can't do business with anybody outside the state of Vermont, you can meet the highest standard and you'll be in good shape. And that's the trick here. Always secure things to the best of your ability and to the expectation of the highest standard, and you'll be fine. Can I
insert a question here, Professor
Sure.
Eicks? Because this is relevant to what you were saying earlier, to dump the information and the data that you don't need. Question from Hugh Randall is, how do you properly dispose of electronic information? Is it sufficient just to put files in the recycle bin and then empty it?
Sergio, do you have some insight on the best way to delete data?
Well, delete data it's always a tricky thing, because even if you put it in the recycle bin and you delete it, there is still trace of that data in your device, right? So the main idea is, yes, you dispose of the data, but you keep track of what happens to that device, right? You have also because the data then is physically somewhere, right? It can be a hard drive of your computer, it can be an external hard drive, and that has to be secured. So you dispose of the data, but there are traces of the data physically in that hardware. So that hardware needs to be secure. And at the end of the life of the hardware, then you should really destroy it. So that is really the simplest way to go about it.
And there's a little bit of a rabbit hole here, because I know a lot of folks lease things like copy machines, and copy machines do actually create a record of everything that you copy. And they have a hard drive inside of them now that copies and records all of that. I will actually send you to a nice resource for this. The Attorney General in the state of Vermont has a great set of links, and particularly to those regarding the destruction of data and how to deal with copiers, printers, and other things that may have recorded personally identifiable information at some juncture, and how to get rid of that and how to deal with that, even if you've leased the equipment. So I would refer you to that, and that's in the list of resources at the end of the slideshow. There's probably a whole hour-long conversation about how to really delete data, and some of that is why I gave it a hot, quick handoff to Sergio, who was very willing to save me from this. This is a rabbit hole, and we can talk for hours about how to actually delete it. So it's worth going and looking at what the FTC, which is the Federal Trade, I'm doing this right, Federal Trade Commission, right, considers deletion and what they consider enough so that you're not subjecting yourself to their fines. I mean, that's really ends up being the standard, is what keeps you out of trouble. Businesses who have questions around data breach, who do I tell? Am I responsible for lost or stolen information? Should I carry insurance? Yes, 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 carry cyber insurance. What do I have to tell people when I lose their data? How do I tell them? I mean, this is tricky, right? This is both a marketing question and a brand and identity question, as well as a legal one. Can I sell data to other companies? Wait, Google makes all this money selling my data, and I know that lots of businesses sell data. Can I do it? Should I do it? What are the risks involved? All right, so let's talk a little bit about what laws apply to Vermont businesses. Vermont laws. First and foremost, pay attention to your Vermont laws. However, laws from other states have a long arm reach. California and nearly every other state in the country has laws that will impact you if you do business with their residents. The reason for this is because the Vermont law specifically states, and we defer to the laws of the states where people reside, which you've got to sit back and feel like, oh, that's not very helpful. How am I as a Vermont business supposed to work through that? And again, this is about being very pro data privacy. So Vermont sets a minimum standard, and if other states fall below that, Vermont is a standard. But if other states are higher than Vermont, you have to meet the other state standards. There are federal laws specifically for most businesses looking at the FTC, European Union's GDPR, right? So a little bit more about the Vermont laws. The position of our AG, at least for the time being, until the next set of elections, is that privacy and data privacy is of paramount importance, and it's about consumer protection. And they're very interested in seeing that data privacy is secured in the state. Who is impacted by our Vermont state statutes? State agencies, the state of Vermont, political subdivisions of the state, so towns, cities, right? You may not think about that, but that's important too. So when your data walks away because the Department of Labor inadvertently posted it, right? They violated a law and they have some obligations under that law to you as a citizen. Public and private universities, yes, we have very high standards and high bars because we are compelled to comply with Vermont laws as well as federal laws. All business entities, whether they're for-profit, nonprofit, sole proprietorships, partnerships, whatever, you're all held to these statutes. And any business that handles, collects, disseminates, or otherwise deals with computerized, private, personally identifiable information. That's who these Vermont laws apply to. So the next question is, what counts as a data breach? I snuck in a little bit earlier that if your employee who was not supposed to have access to data accessed data they were not supposed to access, that's technically a data breach. And it is. So it looks like a little bit of everything counts as a data breach. So how do we as businesses monitor our data, know when it's happened? And the truth of the matter is, and I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, that a lot of businesses are breached. A lot of businesses lose data and are unaware that they lose data. All you can do is your best here, right? And they're looking for reasonable protections, reasonable security. They're looking for businesses to behave in a reasonable manner and to follow through with any promises they make. So if you say you're not going to sell somebody's data, you can't sell their data, right? Unauthorized acquisition of data means if somebody comes in and takes it and they weren't given permission to take it, so that employee. Belief of unauthorized acquisition. So if you think that your machines were compromised in some way, you got to report it. You got to talk to somebody about it. I would talk to a lawyer right away. One of the reasons to talk to a lawyer right away, and I'm now taking some things a little bit out of sync here, out of series, is that lawyers are your conversation with the lawyer is protected by privilege, so you can explore whether or not you had an unauthorized acquisition of data with the lawyer, who can advise you on the legal implications of what you've seen. All right, and they can in turn bring in a third-party vendor to come and help you assess, and again, protected by privilege, and therefore you have some insulation with regards to the law and when you have to notify people that there was a breach, if there was. Compromises of security, confidentiality, or integrity of PII are breaches. It does not include good faith unauthorized acquisition. What does this mean? It means if you hire somebody to see if your systems are secure and they get into a system, that's not an unauthorized access or acquisition. You hired them for the purpose of trying to make sure you're secure. Login credentials by an employee or agent of a holding entity. Let's say somebody was accidentally given access that was too great. Again, that's not considered a data breach. Key factors, what may not be present and they're not necessary. Data possessed by an unauthorized entity, indications that the information has been downloaded or copied. So if suddenly you see all of your clients' information showing up on somebody's blog or website somewhere, and you didn't give access to it publicly, that's a good sign that you've had a data breach or something went wrong. Okay, so pay attention to places where your data shows up where it shouldn't be. Things went sideways. I do have a data breach. Now what? So first thing I recommend is get thee to a lawyer, right? And yes, I'm a law professor and I'm graduating law students who will need jobs. So take this with a grain of salt at your own peril. All right. You need a lawyer if you feel like you've had a data breach. It's important. It will help minimize your liability and help ensure that you have the best possible outcomes from the situation. Notice is required by law in the situation of most data breaches, okay? That means you have to tell the people whose data you lost that you lost it. You have to tell the affected individuals. If you discover the breach, you have to tell them. And if somebody else tells you that you were breached, so this how often will happen when the FBI or someone else has been made aware that your data is floating around out there, they track it back to you and they come and they tell you, they say, hey, you've had a data breach. And you're like, what, where? I didn't see a data breach, but it's there, it happened. You have to notify all your customers at that point. When it's not required, if the PII or login credentials were not able to be misused, this is a sticky wicket, it's a legal standard. You need to go to a lawyer and have them discuss it with you and what that means. If it's in public and been published, you can almost guarantee that it's been misused. So give some thought to that. If you must prove to the Vermont Attorney General or a governing agency, either insurance, finance, healthcare, et cetera, agency, that it hasn't been breached or misused. So you're actually in a situation where you have to hire a technical expert to prove to the government or the agency that you didn't have a data breach. All right, so if you think you did, you probably did. you need to notify. As you can tell from the earlier slides, you're not alone if you have a data breach, right? So at this point, I won't say it's common, but it's certainly frequent enough that it doesn't have the same brand tarnish that it used to. So fear not, go forth, notify. If more than 1,000 Vermont residents are impacted, the consumer reporting agencies must be notified. This is part of the Vermont statute. And we in Vermont have to notify the Attorney General within 14 days that we have received a breach notification or discovery of a breach, that we have suffered a breach. The AG's office will assist and help businesses figure this out. All right, but you have to notify them within 14 days. We have one of the strongest Attorney General notifications in the United States. So be aware, 2 weeks goes very quickly when you're dealing with a data breach or any other high stress situation like this with your business. A little more on notice, third parties that possess Vermonter data must give notice to our AG. So if you are working with a marketing firm that has a breach of Vermont data, they have to notify our AG. And if you find out about it, you should notify the AG if they haven't. All right. All notifications consistent with needs of law enforcement. So if there's a reason law enforcement should be notified, notify law enforcement. That's always a good idea. Timing. You need to do this as fast as possible without unreasonable delay and not later than 45 days. So you get 45 days to notify your customers and the folks whose data was breached, that they have suffered this breach. And you need to behave in a way consistent with needs to restore security, confidentiality, and integrity of the system. What does this mean? It means that if you've got a data breach, you have to fix the data breach. All right. So I get it. I have to write my customers. This is not going to be a fun letter to write. So what do I have to say? You describe the incident in general terms. You do not have to be specific. And in fact, being specific about how a data breach happened can sometimes compromise more data. So you want to be careful with what you say. We had a breach of our online system is enough. You don't say, and it was a Tomcat blah, blah, blah server, and this is the way they got in. That's too much information. Don't tell them, right? Say, we had a breach of this data, enough for them to understand what information was impacted and how it was impacted. Describe the acts taken to secure the information. So what have you done? If what you did was unplug it so nobody can access it anymore, then that's what you say, you unplugged it. Maybe you say, you know, we applied all of the necessary patches and we've been assured by our software vendors that that fixes the problem. Then that's what you tell them. You offer a toll-free number for assistance and information. You give advice to remain vigilant, that the customer should, you know, be aware that this happened because you got to monitor your credit. You got to make sure nobody's taking your data, et cetera. You have to give the approximate date of the data breach. You may offer this notice via a letter to the residents. You can do it via telephone, but notice if you do it via telephone, you can't do it with a pre-recorded message. So for most folks, that's not something that they can personally do, call every customer they've ever had. So electronic notice, if that's your primary method of communication with individuals, is oftentimes the best way to go. So you send them an email and let them know, and you send a written notice. When you get into large notice, sometimes you have to go to a website and a newspaper. So for example, you might announce it through VT Digger or something in the state of Vermont that you had a breach. And there's some special terms that apply if only login information for the site is impacted, because that's not considered as great a risk if it's only login to your particular site. Now, knowing what we know about people and the fact that they probably use the same password to every website online, that's probably still a risk. And you want to just generally, it's good business practice. And it's good and trustworthy to notify them that the breach has occurred.
A question for you, Professor Eicks.
Yeah.
So, and this is actually my question, and then I've got one from one of our SBDC folks. So those requirements for what business needs to do if there is a breach, is that best practices? Are those Vermont specific
Those are
rules?
Vermont
Are they FTC?
specific. Those are
Okay.
Vermont specific rules required under our statutes by Vermont state law.
Okay.
Those are not FTC or industry specific. So for example, if you are in the healthcare industry in Vermont and you run a healthcare clinic, you are bound by the Vermont law, but you're also bound by the federal law called HIPAA that impacts your data as well. So there can be kind of an overlay of privacy laws that impact you. Again, this is not easy. And if you get into the higher risk data, like bank data, financial data, healthcare data, educational data, this is the time when you're talking to an attorney, because you have both state, federal, and sometimes international legal compliance to worry about, that you ought to invest in talking to a lawyer. Plug for the CNPP here for folks that are looking for this kind of advice. There are certainly lawyers in Vermont can offer this advice, and for qualified individuals, there's 5 to 10 hours of free legal advice available, depending on whether or not you qualify under the CNPP. So I would suggest that this is one way you could use that money wisely.
Thank you for the plug. And then I just had another question from Sarah Monroe, actually, and you feel free to answer this at the end if you'd like, if it goes down a rabbit hole. What happens when the breach was many months before and you just find out about it now?
You have to go from the date you became aware, and that the law looks at the date you had reason to know, right? We won't go into the liability here. The notification dates from the date you knew, right? If there was a time when you should have had reason to know, that gets into how they're going to sue you later if if there's damages that were done, right? It is not how the law is written for notification. So your obligation to notify is that date when you set as reasonable that you knew or should have known. Okay. So federal laws, right? I'm going to do this very broadly because there's a lot of federal laws here, and they're all industry specific. As I was saying before, it's medical or it's financial. There's some laws that overlap everyone. Like if you write a privacy policy, you better follow your privacy policy. But by and large, they're industry specific in the United States, which makes compliance challenging sometimes. So industry-based approach to data security and obligations, retail, healthcare, education, they all do it a little differently at the federal level. The FTC, everybody has to pay attention to the FTC. So if you post a policy, you must follow it. There's hefty fines if you do not. Nobody's going to jail if you don't follow your privacy policy, but the fines are huge. So walk your talk. Other industries are defined, as I said, by law. So these are all vertical market spaces that are governed in certain ways by the federal government and how they must treat data. A data privacy lawyer in the SBDC, Sergio, has some experience in these areas. Certainly the incubator, the Vermont Entrepreneurship Legal Laboratory has some experience in this area. If you have some questions or you'd like some education, let us know. We're here for you to support you. So this kind of goes back to the why do I have to care about other states, other countries? The Vermont law clearly states that our vendors must respond to breaches involving personally identifiable information of residents of other states in a fashion that abides by that state's laws. This is tricky. I've linked here to the California CCPA at their Attorney General's office to give you just a basic idea. Right now, that's one of the highest bars in the United States for state data privacy laws. And then the European Union's GDPR checklist is also here. It's also linked in the resources, so you can refer to those. You can do a lot of this education yourself, DIY, before you go to the attorney, right? you go to the attorney to check and make sure you made all of the right assumptions and you've set up your policy correctly and you've answered all of the legal niggly questions that you didn't feel quite like you had pinned down, okay? We all have data, so here's some basic advice. Have a data handling and data privacy policy, right? Even if it's just one sheet because you don't have a lot of data and you don't do data, have the sheet. It's worth having. It's worth putting the effort into thinking about it. Have an incident response plan. What do you do when it goes wrong? Maybe your incident response plan is call my lawyer, call my tech person, right? In that order, because privilege, right? So that may be your incident response plan, and that's okay, but have one. The DIY template is linked here. It's also linked in the resources. Hire a third-party expert if you're uncomfortable. Buy services with clear contracts regarding data obligations. Read the fine print, right? And this echoes what Sergio said earlier. The fine print gets you. Carry cyber insurance. Limit states where you do business. Let's say the California standard is just far too high and you don't want to do it. Then say on your website, unfortunately, we are unable to ship to California residents at this time. Done, right? You know, so you can limit yourself. On the other hand, California is like the 6th largest economy in the world. Do you really want to limit yourself? There's the question. And it may not cost that much for you to be secure in a way that California would approve of. So look at it. Know what decision you're making. Communicate immediately with a lawyer when there's a potential breach. As I've said over and over again, privilege is one reason to do this. That means that anything you talk to them about is sealed and confidential now, right? And protected. You want to get that all under seal as quickly as you can. That allows you to have an open, frank conversation with people that can get you the help you need to resolve the issue and to get back on your feet. All right. So just quickly, the questions, the frequently asked questions that you've had, we've gone through them, we've talked about them, but if you have follow-up questions, please let us know. And we've got we'll stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes and answer your questions.
We don't have any currently in the Q&A, but we're happy to answer any if the attendees would like to pose any.
And Sergio, maybe you have some stuff you want to jump in and put exclamation points on for what I said earlier as well with regards to the legal pieces.
I think you covered it brilliantly.
I think you're very kind.
Well, while we wait for some questions to come in, I just wanted to say thank you to Jeannette and Sergio for your time today. We appreciate you, the contributions that you're making to the Community Navigator pilot program and to all of Vermont business owners, how you can lift them up with this expertise. We want to encourage our attendees and those who are watching on our replay to check out some of our other resources and some general information about our programs. You can find us at the Vermont Small Business Development Center, which is vtsbdc.org. We've got a link in the show notes, in our recording, and of course in the slides that we'll have available on our website. You can find out more about the Community Navigator program at vtsbdc.org/find-CNPP. And of course, you can find out more about the Vermont Law School and the projects and programs that they have through Community Navigator. Professor Eicks had mentioned the Entrepreneurship Legal Lab that provides hours of consulting with lawyers or law students, and also more webinars like this. And finally, we encourage everybody to take any business owner, large or small, if it's a side hustle or something that you're doing part-time or full-time, please take our small business survey. This is part of the Community Navigator program that is being administered by the Main Street Alliance of Vermont and Vermont Professionals of Color Network. We're trying to gather a lot of information that you small business owners are having, some of the issues that you may be having, the challenges, questions that you have about legal services or healthcare or retirement or financial services, access to capital, all of those things that go into running a business. So we have a QR code on the screen. We'll also link it in the show notes and the email that follows so that you can participate in our survey. This will also inform the next webinars that we produce as part of the Community Navigator program. So I'll check in with the folks who are handling the Q&A, see if there's anything else in the chat.
No, nothing else as of now. So,
And
Okay.
then just to wrap up here, I want to make sure that everybody has seen that there's a resource slide tucked in here at the end that certainly can offer you links to all of the information we were talking about during the PowerPoint. And there's some other links embedded, and both the PowerPoint and the video for this will be available on the SBDC website.
Awesome. So thank you very much. We are at time. So thanks everyone for joining us. And again, thanks to our presenters for helping us with this webinar.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye all.